Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Once upon a time, in a bustling American city, Atlanta, the capital of the South, where glass skyscrapers stand alongside the still visible scars of segregation, where jazz wafts through the humid evening air, and where startuppers rub shoulders with civil rights activists, a man whose mere word was enough to shake the markets. Ethan Blake was the kind of man you only meet once in a lifetime, if you're lucky or unlucky. Aged 34, the only son of Richard Blake, founder of the real estate empire Blake Horizons, Ethan had inherited not only a colossal fortune, but also a name that opened all doors, except that of his own heart. Since the age of 22, he had been signing nine-figure contracts, launching residential towers that reshaped the lines of the urban skyline, buying land like others order coffee. His public appearances made headlines. Forbes, a Vanity Fair, sometimes even Time magazine, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, his clear gaze piercing beyond the lenses, as if observing a world to which he no longer belonged. But behind his chiseled jaw, his luxury electric cars, his facade of eco-friendly lifestyle, and his gala dinners where he silently wrote 6-0 checks for the education of poor children, a deep void was eating away at him. He grew up in a huge house in Buckhead, surrounded by servants, tutors, and a father too busy conquering the world to love him. His mother, Vivian, a gentle but self-effacing woman, had died when he was 8 years old from a devastating cancer. Since that day, Ethan's life had been divided in two, before the silence and in silence. He had learned at a young age that power replaces affection, that control stifles fear, and that excellence protects against vulnerability. So he had built towers to escape the earth, erected walls to no longer hear the echoes of childhood, and chased trophies to forget what he had lost: simplicity, tenderness, the right to be fragile. Women crowded around him, each one more beautiful, brilliant, or interested than the last. But none stayed. Or rather, he let none stay. He mastered breakups the way he mastered contracts, with precision, distance, and a strange kind of icy elegance. His life seemed perfect: lofts in Manhattan, a villa in Aspen, a penthouse in Miami, a contemporary art collection, invitations to the Davos summits. And yet, every night, in his immense bed, he often woke up with a start, as if a memory were strangling him. He would get up, walk barefoot on the cold marble, look at the lights of the city and whisper, without really realizing it, "What did I miss?" What he had missed, precisely, was the essential thing. Not wealth, not success, but inner peace, that quiet calm you feel when you are loved for who you are, not for what you have. He was missing that gentle presence, the one who seeks nothing, who asks for nothing, but who warms the walls of a house, even without luxury. And without knowing it, this lack would soon lead him to make an absurd statement. A statement that would change everything. "You Hallelujah Marriott Grand Hotel d'Atlanta" shone brightly. Crystal chandeliers cast bursts of golden light onto the walls, like constellations frozen in space. The guests, dressed in haute couture, sipped vintage champagne, and exchanged pleasantries in hushed, strategic language. It was a world of facades, money, and social calculations. Senators, tech moguls, influencers with two white smiles, actresses with programmed looks, all were there to attend the Blake Foundation's annual gala, which was supposed to raise funds for equal opportunity. But everyone knew that it was primarily a social theater, a showcase of power, a masked ball where ego was exhibited more than compassion. When Ethan Blake took the stage, a wave of respectful silence spread. He wasn't just rich, he was interesting. He said things no one dared to say. He made choices that defied conventions. He represented that unpredictable element that even the most powerful feared. He thanked the guests, greeted the partners, and gave a perfectly measured speech on human values, progress, and hope. Then, in a moment that seemed almost improvised, as if he had just decided to do so at that moment, he paused. His gaze fell on the entrance to the great hall, and, in a calm but firm voice, he said, "Tonight, I will marry the first woman who walks through this door. It doesn't matter what she looks like, what her background is, or how rich she is. If she walks in, it's because she was meant to." An icy silence fell, like a sudden draft in a room that was too hot. A few guests laughed bitterly. Others exchanged incredulous glances. The master of ceremonies nearly choked on his glass of champagne. He's joking, isn't he? Another media stunt. He's just trying to create a buzz. But Ethan wasn't smiling. He stood there, straight, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes fixed on the doorway as if waiting for a prophecy. The cameras of influencers, journalists, and even waiters automatically turned toward the door. Smartphones lifted. Lenses zoomed in. The world held its breath, not because it believed the promise, but because it wanted to know how far he would go. And then, the door opened. Not with a big bang. Just a quiet creaking, almost embarrassed. A figure appeared. She was nothing like a star or an heiress. No designer dress. No sculptural makeup. No studied posture. It was Grace Johnson, 28, hastily hired this very morning by an agency to replace a waitress who had fallen ill. She wore an oversized black uniform, a tray of shaky glasses in her hands, tired sneakers, and on her face, the expression of an exhausted but dignified young woman who works without complaining. She hadn't heard anything of the speech. She had simply gone in out of obligation, thinking she was going back to her shift without imagining that she had just walked in another's destiny. The shock in the room was immediate. The silence became heavy, cruel, sharp. Then, like a rising tide, came the whispers, the stifled laughter, the poisonous comments. Is he making fun of us? A waitress? Seriously, he's lost his mind. Grace stopped, frozen. She felt the looks crush him. She didn't understand. She looked around in confusion, wondering if she'd made a mistake. The tray trembled in her hands. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around. But before she moved, Ethan came down from the stage. Without hesitation, without acting. Every step he took was a statement. He crossed the room, the stairs, the judgments, without blinking. In front of her, he stopped gently. He looked at her, not like a waitress, but like a riddle that the world had missed. "What is your name?" he asked in a low but confident voice. "Grace Johnson." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." She looked down, ashamed, trapped in a theater she didn't understand. But Ethan, he smiled with a rare sincerity. "You have nothing to regret. You are exactly what I was waiting for." And before the assembly suspended between indignation and stupefaction, he held out his hand to her. A simple gesture, revolutionary in this context. Not to marry her right now, but forgive him a place in a world that, a few seconds earlier, wanted to make it invisible. And that evening, without knowing it, it wasn't Ethan saving Grace. It was Grace who was going to wake Ethan up. The day after, all America trembled with excitement and skepticism. The television sets were on repeat. The king of business wants to marry a stranger. Public stunt or crazy move. Who is Grace Johnson? News channels, tabloids, and sensational podcasts all picked up the story. Drones flew over the modest neighborhood of Southside Atlanta, revealing to the world the cracked walls of the building where Grace lived. Stolen photos showed her cramped apartment with simple furniture, her kitchen with faded walls, her dented mailbox. Journalists camped outside her door. Microphones were buzzing whenever she stepped out to buy bread or drive her sister to school. Internet users scoured her social media for photos, old boyfriends, and a past to smear. Within 48 hours, Grace had become a national target. But she didn't bend. When she received an official invitation to dine at a Michelin-starred restaurant in the city center, she didn't even open it. She picked up her old phone and called Ethan's office directly. "I'm not a joke, Mr. Blake. And I'm not for sale," he answered without hesitation. "I don't think of you that way. But if you don't mind, I'd like to get to know you." Really, against all odds, she accepted. But on his terms. No flashes. No guards. No show. They met in a small cafe hidden away in Little 5 Points, known for its worn banquettes and homemade muffins. A place that smelled of life, not luxury. Ethan, 20 alone, dressed simply. No expensive watch, no chauffeur waiting. He entered like a man looking for the truth, not the window dressing. They talked. For a long time. Of music, of childhood, of solitude. Grace recounted how her mother, Charlene, a former nurse, had raised 2 daughters alone before succumbing to an aggressive cancer. She recounted the hours of housework, the odd jobs, the dreams put on hold to pay the bills and support Maya, his little sister, a brilliant student in her final year of high school. Ethan, for the first time in a long time, had nothing to prove. He spoke of Caleb, his older brother, gifted, sensitive, passionate about architecture. Caleb had killed himself 2 years earlier, after sinking into an unknown depression, crushed by the expectations of the Blake family. That day, Ethan understood that success did not redeem absences or silences. Since then, the void had set in and the noise of social gatherings had never managed to silence him. It was the beginning. Fragile. Hesitant. True. The following weeks, Ethan tried to integrate Grace into his world, slowly. He invited her to a conference on social housing, to a charity opening for young artists, to a private party with African-American entrepreneurs in the city. He wanted her to see what he was doing, not what he owned. But the outside world did not forgive. The press was cruel. She doesn't know how to dress. Too simple. Too banal. She doesn't know anything about business. Editorialists compared her to her former conquests, Scandinavian models, Swiss diplomats, Golden Globe-nominated actresses. There was talk of a fall in status, a whim, an existential crisis. Internet users went wild. Social media, merciless, mocked her clothes, her worn shoes, her silences. But Grace didn't defend herself. She didn't respond to any comments, didn't try to prove her worth to anyone. She continued to work part-time, to accompany his sister to theater rehearsals, to cook lasagna on Sunday evenings. She remained herself, and that was even more disturbing. And in the heart of this storm, Ethan spoke publicly, during an honorary dinner broadcast live. I will not marry an image. I will not marry a social role. I fell in love with a free woman, a whole woman. And believe me, in the world I grew up in, that's the rarest thing. This statement cut the rumor mill short. A strange media silence fell. Not because the world had understood, but because, for the first time, power was defending an invisible woman, and this was upsetting the balance. It was no longer a story of luxury. It was a story off-light. And in Ethan's eyes, Grace shone brighter than all the spotlights combined. The following months were a whirlwind of media pressure and heavy stares. Grace gradually felt the weight of a world that didn't want her, a world made of illusions and perfect images, a world where she had become, despite herself, a pawn, a media cause. One morning, as the Atlanta sun barely pierced the shutters, Grace wrote a letter. A letter to Ethan. A letter to say what she couldn't say to his face. I can't live in a cage, even a golden one. I appreciate you, Ethan, for everything you are, but I have to find my own way. It is not a goodbye, but a need for freedom. Without another word, she packed her bags and boarded a bus for Chicago, leaving behind the tumult, the flashbulbs, and the public image that had been imposed on her. In Chicago, in a small apartment in the neighborhood of Hyde Park, she found refuge. There, away from the spotlight, Grace resumed her studies, this time in psychology, determined to understand not only others, but also herself. A mysterious, anonymous grant allowed her to finance her courses. She never asked where it came from. But, in the shadows, the Blake Foundation, secretly guided by Ethan, ensured that she could move forward unhindered. Grace's days were filled with learning, reading, and internships at a center that supports young women who were victims of violence. She listened to their stories, their pain, their struggles. She offered a listening ear, a solid shoulder, without judgment. During these years, she deliberately disconnected from the media. She no longer watched television and avoided social media, seeking to rebuild herself away from the public eye. 3 years passed. On graduation day, Grace, in her navy gown, smiled with a newfound serenity. She held in her hands not only a diploma, but the promise of a new beginning. Back in Atlanta, she opened a small counseling practice in her childhood neighborhood, a simple, warm place where the walls were covered with inspirational quotes and children's drawings. She wanted to help those the system forgot, the invisible, those struggling in the shadows. One afternoon, while she was distributing flyers on the street, a car slowly stopped alongside her. The door opened. Ethan came down. Time had marked her face with a veil of maturity. Her hair was a little grayer, her features softer. But in her eyes, an undiminished light still shone, the same spark that, years before, had seen in Grace a rare light. Without a word, he approached and said, in a voice filled with emotion, "You went your own way, Grace. I waited for you. No pressure. But I'm still here." Grace looked at him for a long time. Then, a bright smile split her face. And I learned to love myself, to walk without depending on anyone. But I never stopped thinking about you. They stood there, motionless, in the middle of that busy street. Two souls who had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. That day, there were no grandiloquent promises, no public declarations. Just the sweet certainty that sometimes love doesn't impose itself, it waits. And that finally, they were ready to move forward together. The wedding day finally arrived, with the sweetness of a spring morning. They had chosen to celebrate their union in a modest garden, nestled on the outskirts of Atlanta, far from the spotlight and pomp Ethan had once known. Here, wildflowers grew freely, swaying in a light breeze, as if to remind them of their newfound simplicity and the beauty in imperfection. No celebrities were present. No red carpet, no flashbulbs. Just the laughter of children running through the trees, warm smiles from former colleagues, loyal neighbors, and students from the small community school Ethan and Grace had supported. It was a gathering of united hearts, united by sincerity rather than notoriety. In the center, under a rough wooden arch adorned with garlands of wildflowers, stood Grace and Ethan, hands clasped, their eyes shining with silent promises. Grace's sister, Maya, now an accomplished lawyer, stepped forward to read a speech that moved the souls present. Her voice, filled with pride and emotion, evoked the struggles, hopes, and strength of their family. You grew up in the shadows, you walked through storms, and yet, you chose the light. You refused to let the world define who you were meant to be. Your love is a victory, not because it's perfect, but because it's true. When it came time for wedding rings, Ethan slipped Grace a ring simple, shaped in wood by a local craftsman, symbol of nature, of life that continues, and of strength rooted in authenticity. Grace, her hands trembling with joy, gave him a ring handmade, modest but elegant, adorned with a small semi-precious stone that she had chosen herself, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. When they exchanged their vows and finally said, yes, no glance sought to judge if they were matched, because everyone understood that what united them transcended appearances, wealth, or standards. It was not a door opened by chance that changed their destiny. It was their conscious choice to see beyond appearances, to recognize the beauty in the soul of the other, and to build together a future where simplicity is a precious luxury. The entire garden seemed to breathe with them. The bird song, the whisper of the wind, and peals of laughter mingled in a symphony of hope and rebirth. And as the sun slowly set over the horizon, Grace and Ethan, hand in hand, walked into this new chapter, free and united, ready to write their own story.